Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Alan Chapell. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael.
It's great to have you here and have a conversation about what we both love, music.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, from what I read, you were a late starter. You were age 6, already playing trumpet and piano.
I was. I think I actually started taking trumpet lessons at 4 or 5, and
Wow.
And then got into piano, a little later in life.
So was it a case of where you had the interest in it, or were you led to it, by somebody else?
Well, it was a little bit of both. My dad is a jazz saxophone player who plays a whole bunch of different instruments, but I think sax is his main one. And so, with that, my brothers and I all took music lessons from a pretty young age. And, I'm really the only one who took to it in a big way. But we all had a taste of it. And, that was just something that you did growing up in our house. Some houses play hockey and some houses do play chess, and, we all played music.
Yeah. Tell me this, what type of music were you listening to in the house? I'm going to guess that records were probably playing frequently.
Well, yeah, although my dad was really much more of a jazz guy than a rock and roll guy. And back then, I think it might even be more pronounced than it is now. I mean, back then, if you're a jazz person, you aren't listening to a lot of rock and roll. And if you're a rock person, you just think jazz is just this too out there thing. And I think now things have changed a little bit, but back then it was a little bit more, regimented. And so that's what we heard a lot of. And, my dad would tolerate the Beatles, but you start playing the Monkees or the Guess Who or Led Zeppelin, and he'd probably ask you to stop.
Tell me this, what albums do you remember as a kid hearing all the time?
Well, it's funny. So I don't remember album names from a very young age. I just know that, like, Nowhere Man and Norwegian Wood and I Love Her and Michelle. So I remember songs, but not so much the album names, because, when you're really young, you don't, you just kind of play what's there. And then you say, hey, Mom, can you put on that Michelle album? You don't even know it's the Beatles necessarily.
Right.
It takes you a while to develop that. Oh, it's the Beatles. And then, oh, this is the album that I really like. And, when I got a little older, I got into bands like the Police and the Talking Heads and Men at Work and the Smiths and the Cure a little later on than that. And then was sort of, off to the races, as it were.
Yeah. Now tell me this, Alan, those albums that you heard frequently as a little kid or, a young age, did they end up having a role influencing your music later?
I think so. I mean, you really get your whole frame of reference by, what you listen to. And I like to joke around, and if I ever meet him, I may have the chutzpah to say this to him, but like Stuart Copeland was extremely influential in my high school growing up. And I bet you high schools all across America. Now, this isn't the part needs chutzpah. This one is. Boy, did that guy influence a lot of horrible drummers who were 14 and 15 years old because they were trying to do what he did. And nobody can do what he did. Right. But if you're 14 or 15, you don't know that yet. So, but yeah, I all of that stuff influenced my writing and the way I see things. And, bands like the Talking Heads, where they just brought in all kinds of strange instruments and different multi-instrumental things and sort of what we eventually called world music into the mix. And that still has a very profound impact on my writing.
Yeah. Tell me this, what would be a couple of your favorite Heads songs?
Well, I always liked Psycho Killer and Burning Down the House and She Was and Life After Wartime. The thing about them is that every single song of theirs, like the floor is just so darn high. Like they don't really have a bad one because there's always something about it where they said, the rhythm of this one is special, or David had turned a phrase in a way that nobody else does, in the way that's brilliant, or Jerry or Chris and Tina, their impact on things. And so boy, that's a band that I don't think has a bad song. Police as well, though. I think those two bands are just, were incapable of doing anything that didn't have a level of brilliance.
Favorite Police tracks?
Boy, I'm stuck with that. I still think the Ghost in the Machine album is my favorite. Omega Man was sort of my favorite B-side on that. That and maybe Darkness were probably my favorite B-sides. But again, there isn't a bad song. And again, I remember growing up, and that album came out right when CDs were big. And so the rumor amongst, because rock and roll has this whole like tall tale rumor thing that most of it isn't true, but it doesn't even really matter. And one of the rumors about the Ghost in the Machine album was that if you played it on CD, because it was computerized, you could hear more and cooler things going on in the background than you could on an 8-track or on an LP. And that was sort of the big, and then we'd have listening sessions and try to and because some kids would swear they could hear something else on it, then and other kids would say, I'm not so sure about that. But that's what's fun, because that became a point of conversation and a builder of culture.
Right. Along those lines, when they did the, I don't want to say box set per se, but they did the first 6 Cars albums. Okasik went in and remastered them. And I remember reading Elliot Easton saying that upon listening to the remaster, he heard things in the mix that he had forgotten were there because he didn't hear them in the other ones. But upon hearing the remaster, remembered those things being done at the time of recording.
And how wonderful is that, to be able to rediscover
awesome.
your own music and just re-fall in love with it. And some of those remastering efforts were just brilliant from that perspective. And, I probably was remiss in talking about the Cars, because that's another band that just blew me away every single time. And they had a nice thing. Like I don't want to beat up on the synth bands in the 80s, because there's some brilliant stuff going on. But the Cars were both very much a synth band and also very much not one, because they didn't do it like almost anybody else, yet had some really unique orchestration and just wonderfully, written hooks.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Cars is simultaneously you hear a song, it's them. And it doesn't sound like anything else. Yeah. But when you hear it, it also falls into the category of the music of its time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you look at that first album. I mean, it's a greatest hits collection.
Yeah. And we'll shake it up. And boy, there's just so much great music from those guys. And one little game that my wife and I like playing, after we put the kid to sleep, and we're cooking dinner, and maybe you've opened up a bottle of wine, is, how many songs does this artist have? Because the Cars are almost misleading. You don't realize, but when you walk through and you're like, oh yeah, this is them too. And you're up into 15, 16, just really, really top-notch, brilliant songs.
Oh yeah. Well, they're a band that when you're making your playlist, you go through, it's like, okay, I'm gonna have this one. All of a sudden you go, well, wait a minute, I've got 9 or 8 songs or whatever from the first album. Then I've got 6 from this one, and then 6 from this one. All of a sudden now you've got, a playlist that has got 50 songs on it.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of the Cars, obviously, you did your cover of Drive. How did you choose to do that one?
Well, like I said, I've been a fan forever. I used to run into Paulina in the West Village, and we weren't close or anything, but when you get to see somebody in the neighborhood at the swing set, you know them just well enough to say hello, and we would chat a little bit. The one thing that I've noticed about her is that she kind of fits in that category. In addition to all the other things about her, is she's a fun mom. You would see kids hanging off the swings as she's giggling, and it was just kind of fun to watch as a parent. So every once in a while I'll sit down and say, hey, I really love this song, and can I do something with it? And those are two, that can I do something with it and will it work? Because you can bang out the chords to 100 different songs and go, wow, I love this song. But can you make it your own within the framework of Chapell, which is, Chapell features, Lorenzo Ponce on the violin, and Lorenzo plays his violin, but sometimes it's very synthy. And so I said, well, you know what? Let's try to do a little bit of that around Drive. And so I put together a demo and I brought it to the band, and they were like, wow, this really works. I was like, yeah, I think it might. And so I always think there's a lot of different philosophies about covering somebody else. And some people will swear that you've got to do it an homage to the original, that it's got to be, really close to what the original vibe was. And then there's other people who say, no, you have to completely reinvent it. Otherwise it's not worth doing. And I actually fit somewhere in the middle, where I didn't want to use the rhythm that they used. I wanted to find my own unique thing, but I also didn't want to move so far away from it that you'd be halfway through it before you realized whose song it was.
Right.
And so I think we struck a nice balance, and it's a nice feel.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. We talk about this on the show a lot, is when you're doing a cover, to me, if you do a note for note, like the old Sounds Like albums from the 70s. Yeah. There's no point to that. You've got to bring something new to it. Because if you do, or if you don't, I should say, why bother listening to the new version? I can go listen to Heartbeat City anytime and hear Drive. But if you bring something new to it, now you're giving me a reason, to give it a spin.
Yep. Two great examples of that, where I thought that they had a really nice balance, where the War on Drugs did a cover of A Touch of Grey, which is by the Grateful Dead. And again, it wasn't like they reinvented it. It's very, very on par with how the War on Drugs does things. But they did make it their own, and it's a really great version. The other one is Jimmy Eat World did an absolute kick-ass rendition of a George Michael song, Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart. And they totally made it their own, but stayed so true to the original thing. By the way, George Michael is another person who's an underrated or underappreciated songwriter.
Mm-hmm. Yes. In fact, have you heard his version of Roxanne, going back to the Police?
I have not. Oh, I have to find that.
It is when you hear it, you're immediately mentally in a smoke-filled, jazz lounge someplace. He took it in a totally different direction. Oh, it's actually one of my favorite recordings that he's done. So
I've got to check that out. That's very cool.
But one of the things that about taking the arrangement and doing it a different way, it's one of the things I love about Herb Alpert, is he can take any song, and and he goes, I always think of myself as an arranger first, trumpet player second. Yeah. But whether it's a Beatles song or a Duke Ellington song, he can take it and you'll hear it and you recognize the song. Sometimes it may take you a moment, but it works. But it's, distinctly, Herb. He's got a great cover of Take the A Train. And that really works. Plus the fact that, the guy's in his late 80s and he's still cranking out new music. To me, that's just a beautiful thing.
I think he's touring, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, God bless him.
So he brings a smile to my face, because back when I was still playing the trumpet, Tijuana Taxi was sort of the staple. And I always thought it was just a brilliant song, but there's just something that's almost defiant about it. And so as a 15-year-old who was, always looking for an opportunity to stick a middle finger up against the man, Tijuana Taxi became like the theme song amongst a trumpet section in Stamford, Connecticut, which I know sounds kind of bizarre, but like whenever we felt slighted or weren't happy with being told to play some, horrible band march type song, we'd start by playing Tijuana Taxi, and that became like
The
Yes,
anthem.
our little mini FU to the man.
Well, I'll tell you, talking about your youth there, uh, age 15, you cut an album. Jimmy Einer is the producer. How does that happen?
Yeah, I was very fortunate there. So I joined, my first rock band. I think I was 14, and by 15 we were working in the studio, and we had attracted Jimmy Einer to, he was into the songs, and he really dug the style of the band, in hindsight, I wish I had realized how fortunate that I was. Sometimes youth is wasted on the young, as they say, because you know every single thing that he said to me, and it was all constructive. I didn't always take it that way, but it was all constructive. But more importantly, he was right. Every single thing he said, listen, what you need to do is get some singing lessons. And you need to think about, like, if you're going to do, if you're going to, if you're going to play a solo with this level of reckless abandon, then don't be so quick to throw it out. Listen to it. Listen to what you've done and try to improve on it. Just a whole bunch of little, and now I guess it's music 101, but at 15, I didn't know any of that stuff. And boy, was the Einer family over the years has been really good to me. And so it just brings back some great memories.
Yeah. Now, a few years after that, you're in Mumbai. How does that come about? And what influence did that create on you musically?
Yeah, so in the late 80s and early 90s, I was in a pretty big I guess what you call new wave rock band that was playing to 3 to 5,000 people up and down the eastern seaboard. But then this thing happened in Seattle. I blame Kurt Cobain, because all of a sudden this big guitar-driven grunge thing came on the scene, and literally overnight there was no work for a keyboard player. Nobody in New York nobody wanted a synth player, and really nobody wanted even like a piano or a keyboard player. So, I talked to a bunch of people, and eventually met this guy who was a guitar player in a band called Kalki, who lived in Mumbai, and we hit it off. We wrote a bunch of songs together, and it was closer to the kind of the world music thing. And in fact, they had been invited on the Peter Gabriel World of Music and Dance tour back in, I forget, 94 or so. And so I moved out there, and we wrote a bunch of songs, and it's funny because nothing went right. We had a handshake deal with a record company, and they reneged on that after a period of time. But my bad for doing a handshake deal with anybody, certainly a record company. But it was still one of the most uplifting periods of my life. I learned a lot. You learn just going to a place that's very, very different than where you're from. Gives you an entirely different perspective. So some of it was just, clearly musically, because I had guys in the band who were doing the Indian Carnatic vocal type thing, and we had a tabla player, and we had a guy occasionally would sit in on sitar, in addition to what I would call a very Western, rock sensibility. So merging those things was really, really cool. But also just being there and absorbing it, and just talking to people. People there are so warm, so open, and so willing to just share who they are, that I don't think I'd be the person I am now, but for that, 6 months or so in India.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm going to guess that that's clearly something that was not on your music plans for your career.
No, but if the problem with planning too much is you end up limiting yourself, and you close your mind to new opportunities. I mean, heck, I almost didn't come out to Sausalito 10 years ago. I had been invited out by Jerry Harrison, and I got to know Jerry a little bit because I knew Chris and Tina, because they used to, from the Talking Heads, they used to come to my band, see my band play in Connecticut back in the day. And Jerry pushed back a couple of times the schedule. And it was sort of like, oh, well, maybe this is never going to happen. Maybe this, and I'm glad I stuck with it, because, the experience of recording that album, it's called the Redheads Allegations. I learned so much from Jerry and from E.T. Thorngren, who's kind of Jerry's right hand engineer / producer. Boy, what a great experience. And then I actually came out here for a little bit of time out in Sausalito, and then ended up, somebody basically gave me one of the houseboats out here in the, which happened to be across the street from Jerry's studio. And so now, I've been living out here for a couple of years, on and off, as between here and New York City.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, talking about the Redheads Allegations, a couple of the tracks on that, Giving Her More. Tell us about that song.
Well, Giving Her More is one of the few songs that I'm still playing pretty actively from that album. I wrote it about my daughter Kylie when I think she was 8 or 9, and she was really upset with me, and really wrote that as let's start fresh. Let's try to figure this out. This is what I want. And Giving Her More is still one of my favorite songs. I play it almost every time that I do a solo acoustic show, because I almost think it lends itself better to that, simple piano and voice thing.
Yeah. Well, the game on that album has got a really good groove. So tell me this, Alan, when you're writing, are you a music first or a lyrics first guy, generally speaking?
Oh, I'm almost always a music first guy. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I know exactly what the groove is going to be, but I will have a pretty good sense of what a verse and a chorus, chords, and usually close to the melody, long before I start on lyrics in almost every song I've ever written.
Yeah, tell me this. Yeah, I've been told many times where you never know where inspiration is going to come from when you're writing a song. What's the most unusual impetus for either a lyric or a groove or a riff or whatever that you've written?
Well, what comes to mind is from a song that nobody's heard yet, because it's on an album that's going to come out probably early next year, called "The Shut Up Cracker." So a year or so ago, my wife and I were living in just outside of Santa Fe, and we have our daughter Rose is now 2 years old, but when she was 6 months, the good news is that she almost always slept through the night. The bad news is that the night usually ended about 5 or 5:30 in the morning. And but the other piece of good news is she was always been a sound sleeper. So she goes to sleep, we open the wine, we turn up the music, we have a party. But 5:30 comes really early, and then good morning, good morning, good morning, and that's the chorus to that song. Just being the baby screaming,
Mm-hmm.
"Get me up."
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, along those lines, Alan, about the time my son was 11 months old, my wife and I said, you know what, we need a break. We need to get out of town. Let's just go. So we go to Vegas. I booked the tickets, booked the hotel. And after I do, my wife says, you do realize that, his bedtime is going to be, 5:00, which means that his wake up time is going to be 5:00. So 5 a.m., here's me pushing a baby stroller through the casinos. It's like, this is the strangest Vegas trip I have ever had.
Yeah, you're wide awake, you're wired, you're incoherent, you probably look like hell, but it's for a whole different set of reasons than maybe 10 or 20 years before.
Exactly. I'll tell you, what was it like working with Jerry in the studio?
Well, the thing about Jerry is that he's been doing this for a while and has a really good sense of of a couple of things. I mean, he gets music. He's but that might not be his biggest strength. I think his biggest strength is that he understands how to get the best out of the people that he's working with, and he understands that everybody has kind of their own motives and motivations, and really trying to keep all that stuff aligned, because we've got all these world-class drummers and bass players, and these people who've taken out a couple of days to help us record an album. But Jerry is really good at just kind of keeping everybody focused and on the prize, and also on the, well, what do you want to get out of this, Alan? Because you can do this or you can do this. I've sometimes jokingly referred to him a little bit as the Wizard of Oz, because in some ways his strength is that he sees what people are capable of and points them in that direction.
Mhm.
And that's a gift, and he has a gift and he gives it.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's always struck me with him, um, his work with the Bodines, for example. That first album they did with T-Bone Burnett.
Yeah.
The second album they do with Jerry, Outside Looking In. And there was a very distinct sound on Bodine's first album, Love and Hope and Sex and Dreams. Then there's a very distinct sound on the second one that's different than the first, but yet it's still clearly Bodine's. So for me, a producer who can, as you said, draw that out of the artist while letting them, making them not repeat themselves, take them in a new way without making it sound fake, or done with, because a lot of times you'll have uh, artists who the first album will sell okay, but then they'll go to where they almost sound like they're trying to appease all the people who didn't like that first album. And then everybody who bought the first album's like,
Yeah.
where'd the stuff I loved go? you know, but Jerry seems to have that unique ability to draw that out of the artist he's working with.
Yeah, that's really a gift, because that's the biggest thing when you go from album 1 to 2 to 3, is you want to show some level of, I don't know if it's progression, but you want to show different sides of you, or different colors. But boy, if you go in an entirely different direction, you alienate everybody. And so
Mhm.
that's always a really, really tough thing. One band that I thought had done that really, really well over the years is, I think U2 had reached the point where, at some point where, like, that sound, they had sort of perfected it, and maybe
Mhm.
the world didn't need another album with that exact sound. And it was at that exact moment that, the edge sort of shifted in how he was playing guitar a little bit, and Bono became less of a crooner and more of a singer. And just those two things alone just dramatically changed how they
Mhm.
sounded, but it was still very obviously U2.
Right. Well, that's the thing about the Edge. I've always loved where the tonality of his guitar,
Yeah.
is always distinctively him. But depending on what the setting is, he can make the guitar play all these different roles while maintaining that identity.
Yeah. He's yeah, it's just brilliant.
Yeah. So now the year after 2017 was when the Redheads Allegations came out. Following year, you put out not one but two albums.
Oh,
So
right, with Soul Man, and then the yeah.
Love in the Summer of Trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Soul Man came out first. Now on that one, uh, the track Watercolors, you mentioned Lorenzo's violin on that. One thing that I've noticed, with Chapell's recordings, her violin is almost like a lead guitar in other bands. The way it's prominent and it plays that role, but because it's not a guitar, it can bring something very distinct to it.
Yeah, I mean, she's first of all, she is just an amazing talent. and there's a whole bunch of reasons that I just love playing with Lorenza. So I'm just going to share a couple. I mean, the one thing is that she's open to how she's being utilized. So she's not, stuck in a, no, it has to be a fiddle because well, it's this kind of song, so it has to do X, Y, or Z. So I've asked her to do at times some crazy stuff and use effects pedals and bring out the synthier vibe. And what that does for the band, I think, is it gives us a much, much more dynamic range because, on Watercolors, I mean, that's a rock and roll fiddle, and it's with the best of them. It's pretty cool. But then you look at, some of the songs on the penultimate album. There's a lot of stuff in there that's sort of odd synth, where it's somewhere in between the Beatles and Police in terms of just kind of weird stuff going on in the background. And the fact that she's able to bring, all of that, in, and has a gorgeous voice. She also sings on Watercolors. It really brings a whole different dynamic to the band.
Yeah, absolutely. So now for you, vocal influences, what singers have influenced your vocal stylings?
Well, let's see. I've always loved Morrissey, and was huge into the Smiths back in the day. But I actually had to back off. Sometimes you have to be very careful if you really, really dig somebody, because you start to sound like them because you think everything they do is great. And that's the last thing you want to do, because the last thing you want to do is to start sounding like somebody else.
Right.
But Morrissey, absolutely. Michael Stipe, for sure. I never had the range of the high end Bono, but some of the lower end stuff. I mean, he's really learned how to carry a tune in a way that to me just has just changed how they how they go. And occasionally, David Byrne, particularly some of the more rhythmic stuff, he's all very big into the ha, 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 kind of thing. And so those are just off the top of my head. But, there's so many just wonderful people to kind of emulate.
Yeah, I'll tell you, at times, I can hear again, my perspective, a Robin Gibb influence.
The Brothers Gibb. Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, they're those guys are just some of the best melody / harmonies ever written.
Mm-hmm.
I wish any of the Chapell brothers could sing, because I do think there's something about having like your DNA intrinsically tied up and have melody harmony and in a way that you just don't quite get from somebody who's not a sibling or somebody you've not sang with for 20 or 30 years.
Oh, exactly. And that's something else we've discussed on the show, is the fact that it's very rare when a non-family group can harmonize and have it sound like it's a family group. Yeah. When you can accomplish that, you got something.
So I saw Houndmouth as a good friend of mine said, "Hey, we should go to this place called Rockwood Music Hall in the Lower East Side of New York." And I don't know if that room holds 150 people, but he said, "Go see, this band is going to blow up in about 6 months." And he was right, but it was Houndmouth. And I don't think any of them are related, although maybe 2 of them are. I forget. But they did the 4-part harmonies that those guys did. It just blew me away.
Yeah. So when you can do that and it's not a blood relation, that's an impressive thing.
Yeah.
So now I tell you mentioned Sausalito, you mentioned the boat. Tell me about the concerts that you did on the boat where your audience wasn't in seats, but were in kayaks and canoes and what have you.
Yeah, so the Sausalito houseboat community has a whole bunch of really cool things about it historically. I mean, it's literally a community that should never have been created in the first place, that just sort of happened organically post World War II, and literally the authorities, the man tried for several decades to destroy it and were never able to. And it's one of the rare instances where, the people won over the authority, which is just pretty brilliant. But one of the things about Sausalito over the last 2 years was it was one of the few places that continued to have live music, because, as you said, people will plug in a generator at what they call an anchor out, some boat out in the middle of Richardson Bay, and from the houseboat community, you'll have 100 people come up and. We have a pedal boat for the baby, but they come up with kayaks and little motorized boats and sailboats, and you'll literally dock and you'll listen to a concert. And we were just out yesterday because it was 70 degrees here, and somebody's birthday. I didn't even know them, but I was hanging out at their house all day. But it was their 50th birthday. This is a big one, I guess. But and they had 3 different bands playing.
Wow!
And just off at the top deck of one of the houseboats, and it's just such a great scene here, and so many creative people.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time there and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'll tell you what. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, it's and there is so much music here. I mean, there's still, Jerry no longer has his recording studio here, but Studio D is still here. I'm literally, I don't know, a quarter mile from the place where, the Rumors album was recorded, and a whole bunch of other great music.
Yeah. So speaking of music, we talked about Drive. Let's talk about some of the other songs that people can watch the video for, on YouTube. Wave As You Walk Past. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, so Wave As You Walk Past is supposed to be kind of a funny little parody. So, this is really a New York City song, and it's specific to somebody who was an old friend of mine, and she ended up being kind of a minor celebrity on a bunch of the Bravo shows. And we reconnected after, I don't know, 10 years. And first time it was wow, hey, how are you? How are the kids? Let's talk for a while. And the second time the engagement was a little less. And by the 4th or 5th time, we were barely like waving as we walked past each other. And by the 8th time, she wasn't acknowledging me for some reason. And so I wrote this song kind of as a faux, hey, what happened to the friendship? But it's supposed to be a little comedic sanctimoniousness. I don't know if that's a term. I'm going to coin it now, where I'm just sort of, it's really meant as a joke, but it hopefully comes off as a, let's not speak falsely now. This is not all we've ever known.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should, as soon as we're done, you should probably, get that copyrighted.
Yeah.
You're going to have your own personal niche in the comedic world.
Fantastic.
Now, how about the one you left behind?
Yeah, so that's really, maybe I should talk a little bit about the whole album. So Two Fishes, and you think about who are the fish, and the fishes are my daughter Kylie, who's now in her 20s, and my daughter Rose, who's 2. And so just think about it from this perspective, because it sort of drives home some of the differences. Kylie was effectively a 9/11 baby, and Rose is a COVID baby. And so their entire upbringing, it was just very different, but also very much defined by the circumstances outside of their control. And so the album itself is really a comparison, a juxtaposition of their 2 upbringings, and some of it with Rose, because heck, the album was written before she was born. It was more of a, this is how it's going to be, or this is how it could be. So the one you left behind is really as much about, 10 years ago, so ago, I made some pretty big life changes in terms of how I wanted to see the world. And part of that resulted in my coming out and meeting Jerry Harrison. And so it sort of all ties together, but the one you left behind is really about change and hopefully about some level of growth. And you can see that if you listen to a bunch of my songs like Shout, which is on the Cinco album, that there's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of, the idea is hopefully is that even the sad song has a kernel of hope in it, and has something that you can use to reflect, or you can see yourself in it, and hopefully people take something away there. But it's also kind of catchy pop song.
Yeah. Well, I always look at it as though an album is a snapshot of where that artist is at that point in time. When you
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh no, I would agree. I mean, I think it really is. It's you know, I don't know that I'm doing concept albums, although this is probably Two Fishes is about as close as I've come. But really about, this is what I'm feeling, because you write, 15, maybe 20 songs, and eventually a dozen or so of them get recorded onto an album. But usually those are done, it's rare that something gets pulled from 6 years ago that you find has new life. That hasn't sometimes, but usually it's what am I going through over these last period of time? And I noticed that I write differently when I'm wandering around the houseboats here in Sausalito than when I'm wandering around the West Village in New York City. It just comes out differently. The things inspire me differently. I don't know if that answers what you were talking about, but that's sort of what came to mind.
Yeah, well, no, I mean that's it exactly. But tell me this, Alan, when you go into to record a new album, do you consciously say, okay, well, we did this on Redhead, we did this on Soul Man, we did this on Love in the Summer of Trouble, or I just messed up the name probably, but do you conscientiously go, okay, we did this on this one, and this one, what are we gonna do different this time?
Yeah, I think so. I think I try not to repeat myself entirely. And I really, because, once you get up into 100 songs, like it's almost hard not to. I mean, you're going to play the same chord progression a couple of times, right? I mean, so, and so what I'll try to do consciously is say, okay, on one album, Lorenzo might be doing more of a synthy thing, and on this other album, it might be more of a, maybe we try to do more, ambient type of stuff, or maybe have Andy something a little different on guitar. Or for Two Fishes, I had Doug Yowell play drums. Rodney Howard, who's wonderful and is, I guess, my go-to drummer at this point. He wasn't available. I forget. I think he was rehearsing a couple of different other shows, and so we brought in Doug, and it was wonderful because Doug brings his own energy into the room. He plays differently, and so that right off the bat gives you a little bit of a, pushes you in a slightly different direction. So yeah, I try to do things a little bit differently, in part because I feel like every album I do, I'm in a different place, and you want to reflect, give that era, its day in court.
Yeah. Now, as far as production value goes, how do you approach that? And do you let the influence of the different musicians, the tonality of the songs, guide what the production value you utilize for that album?
Yeah. So well, the way I start these is I'll bang out a song on, on piano, and mostly have at least the melody, if not most of the words. And then I'll put together a little demo on GarageBand. And so, which is a little software product that comes with all Macs. And it's really wonderful for a free program. It's really pretty cool. And so that way I present the band, complete with drums, bass, guitar, everything is in it. And then I can present the band with, like, these are the chord charts, these are the individual part charts, which what I found, and again, every band has got to figure out what works for them, but what works for me is that the more structure I provide to the band about what it is I'm looking for, the easier it is for them to then take that structure and make it their own. Whereas what you don't want is somebody to come in. So here's a great example: the song Gold from the Two Fishes album. Like, you can listen to that and you can go, that's kind of a blues song. And it sort of is, but it's really closer to like a new wave blues song. So what you have to be careful about is that somebody in the band hears blues song and then puts on their blues hat and starts doing something that's very blues, because that's not what it's about, man. It's about it's about taking a genre and melding it with some other genre and hoping at the other end it comes up with something that you like. So again, for me, what I found really helpful is to give some structure to the band, so that they, within that defined structure, are able to help make it work a little bit better. And they do every single time. I come out with a demo that is kind of cool, and then these guys are able to bring it to life, and it's really wonderful. And the reason I work with these guys.
Yeah, well, you've found a way to strike a nice balance where the songs simultaneously have that singer-songwriter vibe, but with an 80s feel to it.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this is that's the, your first question was about, what influences me, and I think for most people, the thing that they were listening to when they were 12 becomes rather definitive. Now, I'd like to think that even though it's definitely 80s influenced, that I bring different things to the mix, with each song, and try to and make it its own kind of hopefully unique thing. But I found that, like, there's very few people you know who find a complete transformation after your teen years.
Hmm. Well, and the thing too with the 80s, yeah, the first thing people think of is synth-based, yeah, new wave pop, if you will. But there was so much more going on, and a lot of the bands had just guitars. They just weren't as prominent in the mix as what they were in years prior.
Yeah, and I don't know, is ZZ Top an 80s band? That's when they were big.
Well, that's it. That was, I mean, granted, they were already in their by the time that Eliminator came out, they were already what 11 years into their deal with RCA, but
Yeah.
yet that was the biggest album. So now, granted, there's a big difference between Eliminator and Rio Grande Mud, but it's still ZZ Top.
Yep.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Now tell me this, Alan, is there anything that we didn't hit on that we want to make sure that we do?
Well, no, I think, this has been a lot of fun for me, and I hope that people listening to this want to hear and know more. Your best bet, and okay, so you've got visit thisischapell.com for all things Chapell, which is great. When I play live, I tell people visit a website called givinghermore.com, and I do that because nobody can figure out how to spell Chapell, and even if they did, the first 50 pages would be Dave Chapell. And so I just
You're not him?
givinghermore.com, and that takes you to all my socials. Because boy, if you want to support musicians, and everybody may have their own philosophy on this, but the thing that I need is I need more people, following me on Spotify and coming to my shows, and following me on Instagram and Facebook and et cetera, because that's the thing that helps get your music and awareness out there.
Well, you mentioned your shows. I know your shows have got a very loyal following, and you've built quite the reputation for the shows. Tell us about your approach to putting on a live performance.
Well, I think no matter what, I try to find things for people to relate to. I like to tell stories, and I like to tell people what the songs are about. I found that it's probably a little easier to do that in some of the solo shows, because you go in as a solo artist and you can tell 2 or 3 decent stories in a 45 and 50-minute set, and people really dig that because they just want to. It's a little harder to do that sometimes with the full band, where people are expecting to the 1-2 punch of the vibe. But even there, then I try to bring out that feeling, that catharsis within the grooves that we create. And having a band as talented as mine is, it's fun to do, and it's great that we can do that. And then I tell a couple of stories here and there, but it's a little bit more about the visual aspect of the vibe of everybody kind of dancing and having a party.
Yeah. Well, dancing, having fun, having a party, that's a good thing.
It is. And it's great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's ready for that because there's
Yeah.
no replacement for live music.
No, there really isn't.
So, But tell you what, on that note, we'll bring this one to a close. Alan, thanks for taking the time out to join us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. This was fun.
All right. Sounds good. Good to hear that. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Everybody, have a good night.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.